Secretary Albright, thank you so much for spending time with us.
I'm delighted, really great.
What we're seeing globally now is this kind of rise of populism, a kind of authoritarian leader. Is this a failure of democracy? Why?
Well, I think we are going through very difficult times because there have been a lot of dislocations in the world as a result of technology, desertification, a lot of movement of peoples because of displacement as a result of warfare internal to states. So I think this is a difficult period. The 21st century turns out to be very disruptive in so many ways. And I think that the people are feeling as though they aren't being heard, that they are divided, that they have different views. And I think what has happened is that there are people in many, many countries who are taking advantage of it in terms of leadership and feeling that the popular discontent gives them a right to then become strong/authoritarian leaders. And so there is a connection in terms of all the disruption, and then those leaders that then, some of whom have actually been elected fairly, who then decide that they are going to exercise more and more authority and really then become authoritarian leaders. So that connection between populism and authoritarianism is something that I think we all need to explore more and more.
What role has technology played in this?
I think technology has been absolutely instrumental in all of this. And I think the hard part here is that technology in so many ways is a double-edged sword. It has connected us in the most incredible ways and has allowed people to, in rural areas of any country, women for instance, not to have to walk miles to pay their bills. They can do it through mobile phones and people are connected. That's the good part. The downside of it is that it has disconnected, disaggregated voices so that people feel either alone or totally the victims, and they don't know they're victims, of kind of an echo chamber in terms of facts and information, and don't know what the truth is. And so in so many ways it is obviously terrific and obviously something that is damaging. I have just been reading about there's some tech companies that are actually saying they created Frankenstein, that there really are issues in terms of how it is used. And so one could say that it's neutral, frankly, the technology itself, but that it is being used by a variety of groups to really carry out their own policies.
Some of the groups that are being awarded by NDI tonight is looking at fighting fake news. Oxford Institute says that they have evidence to show that the kind of manipulation, the mass manipulation, is occurring on these platforms. Where do you see this heading?
Well, I'm very troubled by it because obviously it is influencing people in ways that are counterproductive and even worse, damaging in so many ways. And I do think it's terrible when people don't know what the truth is. That they are being bombarded with a variety of information and made up things. I mean, and that those who are really good at this kind of thing, the Russians, for instance, are able to manipulate information, put it into the airwaves and a variety of ways, and persuade people that lies are true. And that is what's so damaging to democracy. And the reason that we're honoring the people tonight is that really they can plot it out. They can show what happened in terms of what happened in Ukraine, for instance, of taking some small piece of information about whether they fought with the Germans and kind of make up things. And so that's the danger with it. We don't know where the news comes from, and therefore facts are distorted and they're wrong.
Let's talk about President Trump's visit to Asia, where he's on a 12-day visit. The Philippines is interesting because, as a joke, last year during our elections, people were saying that, Duterte and Trump will be together. Well, they're going to be together, and President Trump has been called the Duterte of the West, and Duterte has been called the Trump of the East. What do these two leaders have in common, and where are they different?
Well, we'll see. I mean, they have been in some kind of communication with each other, and I do think that, by the way, I really do think this is a very important trip for President Trump. It allows him to expand on some of the things that he has said about what our relationships with East and South Asia, North and really kind of general relationships, and to be able to explain to the people that he's going to meet with and the entire world audience kind of what our trade policy is, what our climate policy is, what the security issues are. And so I think it is an opportunity to really present America's picture and what we're doing. And I think it will be very interesting to watch the meetings between and among the leaders and how they really react to each other. I know that when I traveled with President Clinton, it was always very interesting to watch the personal relationships and to, at one and the same time, remember that you represent your country, that you are, as president, the person that can tell the story about what the country's about, and then also remember that the leader that you're talking to on the other side is doing the same thing, but there always are situations in which they can be win-win and can really figure out what they have in common. So it'll be interesting to see.
Both men are mavericks in their own way. I mean, President Trump, how prepared is the State Department for President Trump's visit to Asia after the TPP has been thrown out?
Well, I think that is a genuine question, because one of the things that I think is unfortunate is that the State Department is not fully staffed at the moment, and the people that are there are working extra hard. They are very hardworking, patriotic Americans who work for the government and want the best things to happen. And so the part that I think is interesting is that some, and there are going to be obviously meetings on trade issues in Vietnam, and I think that it'll be interesting to see how some of the suggestions that are made there are not too different from what TPP was going to present. And so it'll be interesting to see how that is all rationalized. And frankly, whether there are going to be any joint statements. That's the other part that is always, that one looks at as kind of the deliverables from these kinds of meetings. A presidential trip is a really big deal. And it is an opportunity, as I said earlier, in order to really present your country's story and to relate to the other leaders. So I think it's a big opportunity for President Trump.
I'll take just a short break to take a question from Ram Tabasco. Thanks for your question, Ram. Hello, Secretary Albright. Radical ideology spread through social media and is picked up by a greater audience than ever before. What's the solution to this problem?
Well, I think the solution to the problem is for the legitimate media to be able to state the views and to tell the people what is really true. What I think is unfortunate is the extent to which some of the authoritarian leaders that we were talking about are trying to limit the activities of the legitimate media. And so you've got the advantage that social media has, and the disadvantage of the fact that the official media, the genuine media, the real media, is being limited or censored. And so I think it's a particularly difficult time. When I was a real academic, I specialized in the role of information and political change. And there always is some information, and the question is, who really has the truth? And the people know an awful lot, or they did. For instance, I was studying Czechoslovakia in 1968. The people knew more because they were listening to Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, and they kind of talked to each other. And the official media didn't know what was going on, and it wasn't until the official media stopped being censored and they could actually say what they needed to. What is happening now is the opposite, which is that the people are misinformed as a result of social media, and the press, the genuine press, have the truth. And yet at the same time, the authoritarian leaders are censoring them. So it's kind of the opposite of what we've seen.
Fascinating. Let's go to my last two questions. I know your time is short,
Yeah.
but President Duterte has been in office now for a little over a year, about a year and a half. He is the most powerful leader the Philippines has had in the last few decades. He has a supermajority in Congress. He will appoint 11 of 13 justices in the Supreme Court. How do you see his performance so far?
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, he clearly is popular, but from some of the things that he's doing, one is troubled by some of the aspects, and I think that it's interesting, and it goes back to the first thing you kind of asked me, which is what happens when populism really brings you a leader that then has very strong and, from some perspectives, very difficult policies. So I think that one of the things that I try not to do is to get involved in other countries' domestic politics.
Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, they've all had very strong words to say about the drug war, and I guess that's going to be. President Trump actually patted President Duterte for the drug war. Was that a surprise?
Well, first of all, let me say I have always thought that it is very important for organizations such as Amnesty and Human Rights Watch to make their statements clear. I think that those of us that believe in democracy and human rights really count on non-governmental organizations to make their statements. Without them, it's hard when you're in office and they criticize you, but the bottom line is they play a very, very important role in making sure that people's rights are observed. And so I think that we'll have to see how the two leaders really, what they say to each other, and how they react to each other's statements. I hope that what President Trump, he is the representative of the United States, and we don't have a similar kind of issue in terms of dealing with people. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it works.
Security issues. One of the big things that happened in the Philippines is that the other place ISIS has actually taken land is in the Philippines, in Marawi, and held it for almost 5 months. How would you gauge the threat of terrorism of ISIS?
Well, what I'm very concerned about is obviously there are issues in various parts of the world that have Muslim populations. We are watching what is happening in Burma, Myanmar, and what happens is that ISIS, which has lost its territory, now seems to be kind of linking itself up and taking advantage of some of the legitimate needs of people of a variety of religions and using it to their own purposes. I mean, we're seeing that in a lot of different places, and that is what one has to be concerned about, is ISIS kind of being opportunistic in terms of taking on what are some issues that are within all those countries.
And in North Korea, how do you see this?
Well, I think North Korea is the most dangerous thing that is happening in the region. And obviously not only affects Asia, but it affects all of us. And I hope very much that President Trump is able, in all these meetings, to have discussions with the leaders about what we can all do in terms of using diplomatic tools and the economic tools. The use of force always has to remain on the table, but I think everybody needs to be aware of the massive dangers that will come from that. But I do think that one of the important parts of this very important trip is to get some consensus with our friends about what we can really do, because it is very, very serious.
And my last question, Secretary Albright, maybe you can wrap your thoughts into this, is the changes in leadership, right? What America is going through, the fact that it's pulled out of certain, some of the things it's advocated in the past, the climate change, TPP in our part of the world, these ripple through the rest of the world. So how do you see what America is going through? How is it affecting the rest of the world, and how do you see it moving forward?
Well, I'm very troubled. I used to be known as Multilateral Madeleine, and because I really do believe that there are ways that multilateral action can help us all. It is not a sign of weakness, but of strength to have partners that do things together. And so I know that President Trump is going to be involved in some multilateral meetings, and I hope that he finds them very useful, especially on issues of trade and climate change. And I do think that the U.S. needs to be a leader, and that I've said now many times, Americans don't like the word multilateralism. It has too many syllables and it ends in an ism. But basically it's partnership. And I think finding partners in order to solve problems is very, very important. And I hope that in this trip that President Trump will see the importance of acting multilaterally with our friends.
As the U.S. pulls out of some of these things, what role do you see China playing?
Well, it's clear the Chinese are filling in the vacuum. It is very interesting for me to see that all of a sudden the Chinese are taking the lead on climate change when you can barely breathe in Beijing, and that also basically that they are developing a variety of tentacles into the trading system through the One Belt, One Road. And so I do think that they are filling in where we are stepping back. And I have so believed in American leadership because it's with others. Americans are not a country that want to dominate. We want to have partners in terms of dealing with issues that trouble everybody, on nuclear proliferation and climate change and economic well-being for all.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.